Welcome. Tonight's topic is Neanderthals were absolute freaks of nature, and we're going to jump right into the story. No time to lose. Deep in the frozen landscapes of Ice Age Europe, something extraordinary walked among the glaciers and mammoth herds that most people today would struggle to recognize as human. These were the Neanderthals, and calling them simply our ancient cousins doesn't begin to capture just how absolutely bizarre and fascinating these beings really were. Picture a creature that shared nearly all of our DNA, yet possessed physical capabilities that would make modern Olympic athletes look like fragile children, combined with a brain that was actually larger than ours and sensory abilities that bordered on the supernatural. The first thing that strikes you about Neanderthals when you really dig into the archaeological evidence is their sheer physical power. We're not talking about someone who spent years in the gym developing impressive muscles. No, these were beings whose very bone structure tells a story of strength that seems almost mythical. Their arm bones were so thick and robust that when archaeologists first discovered them, many assumed they belonged to some kind of ancient bear or other large mammal. The muscle attachment points on their skeletons show evidence of musculature that would dwarf even the most dedicated bodybuilder. Their hands could exert a grip strength that modern researchers estimate at nearly double what even the strongest humans today can manage. But it wasn't just brute strength that made Neanderthals so remarkable. Their entire skeletal system was built like a biological tank designed to withstand punishment that would hospitalize or kill a modern human. Their ribcages were barrel-shaped and enormous, housing lungs with a capacity that allowed them to process the thin, cold air of glacial Europe with ease. Their skulls were incredibly thick, with brow ridges that jutted forward like natural armor-protecting eyes that were significantly larger than ours. Those eyes, by the way, weren't just bigger for show. They were adapted to gather every possible photon of light in environments where darkness lasted for months and the sun, when it did appear, barely cleared the horizon. The cold resistance of Neanderthals reads like something out of a science fiction novel. While modern humans require layers of sophisticated clothing and heated shelters to survive even mild winter conditions, Neanderthals lived comfortably in temperatures that would kill us in minutes. Their bodies were compact and stocky, following what scientists call Bergmann's rule, which states that animals in colder climates evolve shorter, more robust body types to conserve heat. But Neanderthals took this to an extreme. Their torsos were so wide, and their limbs so powerful that they resembled living, breathing furnaces capable of generating and maintaining body heat in conditions that averaged well below freezing for most of the year. Their noses were enormous by modern standards, and for good reason. These massive nasal passages weren't just for show. They were sophisticated biological heat exchangers that could warm incoming air from sub-zero temperatures to body temperature before it reached their lungs, while simultaneously conserving moisture from outgoing breath. This adaptation was so efficient that Neanderthals could breathe comfortably in air cold enough to cause immediate frostbite to exposed modern human tissue. When we examine their teeth, another layer of their extraordinary nature becomes apparent. Neanderthal teeth were not only much larger than ours, but they show wear patterns that suggest they used them as tools in ways that would shatter modern dental work. They bite through materials with a force that researchers estimate at nearly twice what humans can generate, and their teeth show evidence of being used to grip, tear, and process materials that weren't just food. Some Neanderthal teeth show microscopic scratches and wear patterns consistent with being used to soften leather, strip plant fibers, and even work stone tools. But perhaps most unsettling of all is what we've learned about their brain capacity. The average Neanderthal brain was between 10 and 15% larger than the average modern human brain. This wasn't just a matter of their skulls being bigger overall. The actual brain tissue volume exceeded ours significantly. What they did with all that extra neural processing power remains one of the most tantalizing mysteries in human evolution. Some researchers suggest it may have been devoted to enhanced spatial reasoning, allowing them to navigate and hunt in three-dimensional environments like dense forests and cave systems with supernatural precision. Others theorize it may have been used for processing sensory information in ways we can barely imagine. Their hearing was extraordinarily acute, capable of detecting sounds across a much broader frequency range than modern humans. Archaeological evidence suggests they could hear subsonic vibrations through the ground, possibly allowing them to detect the movement of large animals from miles away, or even to sense approaching weather patterns through the minute pressure changes that preceded them. Some researchers have proposed that Neanderthals may have communicated using low-frequency vocalizations that would have been inaudible to most modern humans, creating a kind of stealth communication system that allowed them to coordinate hunts without alerting prey. The more we learn about Neanderthal tool use, the more apparent it becomes that they weren't the primitive club-wielding cavemen of popular imagination. They created composite tools that required sophisticated planning and multiple steps to complete. Some Neanderthal spears required the careful selection and modification of multiple types of wood, the creation of adhesive resins from tree saps, and the precision shaping of stone points, all assembled with a level of craftsmanship that speaks to cognitive abilities that were not only comparable to ours, but may have exceeded them in certain areas. Their hunting strategies reveal a level of tactical thinking that borders on the supernatural. Rather than simply chasing animals until they dropped, Neanderthals engineered elaborate ambush scenarios that required them to predict animal behavior days or even weeks in advance. They would modify landscapes by creating funnel-shaped clearings in forests, build stone walls to channel mammoth herds toward cliffs, and coordinate group attacks with a precision that required each individual to understand not only their own role, but the roles of every other member of their hunting party. What makes this even more remarkable is that they accomplished all of this with virtually no visual aids or external memory systems. While modern humans rely on written language, maps, and complex tools to coordinate group activities, Neanderthals had to keep track of elaborate multi-step plans entirely in their heads. passing detailed information between individuals through purely verbal or gestural communication. The cognitive load required for this kind of mental organization and social coordination suggests intellectual capabilities that were not just different from ours, but in many ways superior. Their relationship with fire reveals another dimension of their extraordinary nature. While early humans struggled for hundreds of thousands of years to reliably create and maintain fire, Neanderthals had mastered not just fire creation, but fire management on a scale that seems almost industrial by comparison. They created fires that burned continuously for months, carefully managing fuel supplies and air flow to maintain exact temperatures needed for different purposes. Some Neanderthal sites show evidence of multiple specialized fires running simultaneously, each calibrated for specific tasks like cooking, tool making, or heating different areas of their living spaces. They didn't just use fire for warmth and cooking. They used it as a sophisticated chemical processing system. Neanderthals knew how to create temperatures high enough to chemically alter stone, making it easier to shape into tools. They understood how different types of wood produced different heat signatures and chose their fuel with the precision of modern metallurgists. Perhaps most remarkably, they created and used fire-resistant ceramics, crafting containers and tools from clay that they fired to temperatures that required not just intense heat, but careful temperature control over extended periods. The artistic capabilities of Neanderthals continue to surprise researchers as new archaeological sites are discovered and analyzed with more sophisticated techniques. Far from being purely utilitarian beings focused only on survival, Neanderthals created art that demonstrates sophisticated aesthetic sensibilities and symbolic thinking. They mixed pigments from minerals to create paints in specific colors, applied these pigments to cave walls in patterns that suggest intentional artistic expression, and even created jewelry from shells and carved bones that required hours of careful work for purely decorative purposes. Some of the most haunting evidence of Neanderthal culture comes from their burial practices. Unlike any other known species, Neanderthals buried their dead with what appears to be genuine emotional ceremony. They arranged bodies in specific positions, surrounded them with tools and food, and in some cases covered graves with arrangements of flowers and stones that could only have been placed there intentionally. This suggests not only that they had concepts of death and afterlife that were sophisticated enough to warrant ritual treatment, but that they experienced emotional bonds with their deceased strong enough to motivate elaborate memorial practices. The genetic analysis of Neanderthal remains has revealed perhaps the most unsettling aspect of their nature. These weren't beings who evolved in isolation from our own ancestors. They interbred with early modern humans extensively enough that most people of European and Asian descent today carry measurable amounts of Neanderthal DNA in their genetic makeup. This means that rather than being some completely alien branch of human evolution, Neanderthals were close enough to our own species to produce viable offspring, yet different enough to possess capabilities that seem almost supernatural by comparison. Some of the genes inherited from Neanderthals appear to confer advantages that are still beneficial today. Certain Neanderthal gene variants seem to enhance immune system function, helping modern humans resist diseases that would otherwise be fatal. Others appear to improve the efficiency of oxygen processing at high altitudes, making people with these genetic variants better adapted to mountain environments. Still, others seem to enhance certain types of sensory processing, particularly the ability to distinguish subtle differences in texture and temperature through touch. But the most intriguing Neanderthal genetic legacy may be in the realm of cognition itself. Some researchers have identified gene variants inherited from Neanderthals that appear to influence brain development and neural connectivity in ways that enhance certain types of spatial reasoning and pattern recognition. People who carry these variants often show enhanced abilities in three-dimensional visualization, mathematical reasoning, and the kind of intuitive understanding of physical systems that made Neanderthals such formidable hunters and tool makers. The mystery of what happened to the Neanderthals becomes even more compelling when you consider just how supremely adapted they were to their environment. These weren't struggling primitive beings barely hanging onto existence. They were apex predators and sophisticated tool users who dominated European ecosystems for hundreds of thousands of years. Their disappearance around 40,000 years ago coincides almost exactly with the arrival of modern humans in Europe, but the mechanism of their extinction remains hotly debated among researchers. Some theories suggest direct competition for resources, with modern humans gradually outcompeting Neanderthals for hunting grounds and living spaces. Others propose that diseases carried by modern humans may have devastated Neanderthal populations that had no immunity to African pathogens. Still others suggest that climate change may have altered European ecosystems in ways that favored the more generalized adaptations of modern humans over the specialized cold weather capabilities of Neanderthals. But perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that Neanderthals didn't go extinct at all, at least not in the traditional sense. The extensive interbreeding between Neanderthals and modern humans suggests that rather than dying out, they may have been absorbed into our own species through a process that was part conquest, part integration, and part genetic assimilation. In this scenario, Neanderthals didn't disappear. They became part of us, contributing their extraordinary capabilities to the genetic heritage of modern humanity. The implications of this genetic legacy are still being explored by researchers, but some of the findings are remarkable. People with higher percentages of Neanderthal DNA often show enhanced performance in tasks requiring spatial visualization, such as navigation, engineering, and three-dimensional artistic work. They also tend to have enhanced immune responses to certain types of infections and better adaptation to cold climates. Some studies have even suggested that Neanderthal genetic variants may contribute to enhanced musical ability and sensitivity to sound, possibly reflecting the sophisticated acoustic communication systems their ancestors developed. The physical capabilities that made Neanderthals such extraordinary beings may seem like evolutionary advantages that were lost when they disappeared, but traces of these abilities persist in modern human populations. Elite athletes with significant Neanderthal ancestry often show enhanced power-to-weight ratios, superior cold tolerance, and the kind of spatial awareness that makes them exceptional at sports requiring three-dimensional thinking like gymnastics, skiing, and rock climbing. Understanding Neanderthal sensory capabilities requires us to fundamentally reconsider what it means to experience the world as a human being. Their enhanced hearing wasn't just a matter of being able to detect quieter sounds. They could perceive acoustic information across frequency ranges that are completely inaudible to modern humans. This may have given them access to an entire layer of environmental information that we can't even imagine. They could hear the subsonic communications of elephants and other large mammals from miles away, detect the approach of weather systems through minute changes in atmospheric pressure, and possibly even perceive the low-frequency vibrations created by geological processes like earthquakes and volcanic activity. Their enhanced vision was equally remarkable. Not only were their eyes larger and more sensitive to light, but the structure of their visual cortex appears to have been organized differently from ours. Rather than processing visual information in the highly specialized way that modern human brains do, Neanderthal brains seem to have devoted much more neural processing power to integrating visual information with other senses. This may have given them a kind of synesthetic perception of their environment, where visual, auditory, and tactile information were processed together to create an incredibly rich and detailed mental map of their surroundings. The implications of this enhanced sensory integration are staggering when you consider how it would have affected their daily lives. Imagine being able to look at a landscape and simultaneously perceive the acoustic signature of every animal within miles, the scent trails of prey species, the moisture content of the air, and the subtle vibrations indicating underground water sources or mineral deposits. For Neanderthals, the world may have been alive with information that would be completely invisible to modern human senses. This enhanced environmental awareness extended to their understanding of weather and seasonal patterns. Neanderthals lived through multiple ice ages, adapting to climate conditions that changed dramatically over relatively short periods. Their ability to predict and prepare for these changes suggests a sophisticated understanding of meteorology that was based not on abstract scientific principles, but on direct sensory perception of atmospheric conditions. They could feel approaching weather systems in their bones, quite literally, as changes in barometric pressure would have been detectable through specialized sensory organs that most modern humans have lost. Their relationship with the plant kingdom was equally extraordinary. Neanderthals had an encyclopedic knowledge of plant properties that extended far beyond simple identification of edible species. They knew which plants could be used as medicines, which could provide materials for tool making, and which could be processed into textiles, adhesives, and even primitive chemical compounds. Some Neanderthal sites show evidence of sophisticated plant processing that required knowledge of chemistry that wouldn't be formally understood by scientists, until thousands of years later. They knew how to extract active compounds from plants through fermentation, distillation, and chemical precipitation. They created medicines that were targeted to specific ailments, using combinations of plants that modern pharmaceutical research has confirmed contain complementary active ingredients. Perhaps most remarkably, they appear to have understood the psychoactive properties of certain plants and used them in controlled ways for what may have been religious or therapeutic purposes. The social organization of Neanderthal groups reveals another layer of their remarkable nature. Unlike modern humans, who tend to organize themselves into hierarchical structures with clear leaders and followers, Neanderthals appear to have lived in highly egalitarian societies where decisions were made collectively and resources were shared equally. This wasn't because they lacked the cognitive capacity for complex social organization, but because their enhanced empathetic abilities made them naturally inclined toward cooperative rather than competitive social structures. Evidence from Neanderthal sites suggests that they cared for disabled and elderly members of their communities with a level of dedication that exceeded even modern standards of social welfare. Skeletal remains show individuals who survived for years with disabilities that would have required constant care and support from their communities. These weren't isolated cases of individual compassion, but systematic patterns of social support that suggest Neanderthal societies were organized around principles of mutual aid and collective responsibility. Their child-rearing practices were equally remarkable. Neanderthal children took longer to mature than modern human children, remaining dependent on their communities for extended periods while their enlarged brains completed development. During this extended childhood, they received intensive education in survival skills, tool making, and environmental knowledge that was far more comprehensive than anything modern educational systems provide. By the time a Neanderthal child reached adulthood, they possessed a depth of practical knowledge and sensory capability that would be considered superhuman by modern standards. The extinction of such remarkable beings becomes even more tragic when you consider that they may have possessed capabilities that would be invaluable to modern humanity. Their enhanced environmental awareness could have provided insights into sustainable living practices that might have prevented many of the ecological crises facing the modern world. Their sophisticated understanding of plant chemistry could have accelerated the development of natural medicines and sustainable materials. Their egalitarian social structures might have offered alternatives to the hierarchical systems that have led to so much modern conflict and inequality. But perhaps most importantly, their enhanced sensory capabilities and environmental integration suggest ways of experiencing the world that modern humans have largely forgotten. In our rush to develop technological solutions to environmental challenges, we may have overlooked the fact that our own ancestors possessed biological capabilities that could have provided more elegant and sustainable answers. The genetic legacy of Neanderthals that persists in modern human populations represents a kind of evolutionary backup system, preserving capabilities that may become essential as we face the challenges of climate change and environmental degradation. The study of Neanderthal genetics has revealed that their enhanced capabilities came with trade-offs that may help explain both their remarkable abilities and their eventual displacement by modern humans. Their enlarged brains required enormous amounts of energy to maintain, meaning they needed to consume far more calories per day than modern humans. Their enhanced musculature and robust skeletal systems also required substantial nutritional resources to develop and maintain. In environments where food was abundant, these trade-offs were easily manageable, but during periods of scarcity, their high energy requirements may have put them at a disadvantage compared to the more energy-efficient modern humans. Their specialized adaptations to cold climates, while extraordinarily effective, also made them less flexible when environmental conditions changed. Modern humans, with their more generalized anatomy and greater behavioral plasticity, could adapt to new environments more quickly and efficiently. When climate change began altering European ecosystems at the end of the last ice age, modern humans could shift their hunting strategies, modify their tool technologies, and explore new territories with greater ease than the more specialized Neanderthals. But calling Neanderthals inflexible would be a mischaracterization of beings who survived and thrived through multiple ice ages and dramatic climate shifts over hundreds of thousands of years. Their apparent inflexibility was more likely a reflection of their deep integration with specific ecosystems. They weren't generalists like modern humans. They were specialists who had co-evolved with particular environments to such an extent that they had become living embodiments of those ecosystems' evolutionary pressures. This level of environmental integration meant that Neanderthals didn't just live in their environments. They were part of them in ways that modern humans have never achieved. They could read the health of an ecosystem through subtle environmental cues, predict the behavior of prey species with uncanny accuracy, and modify their own behavior to maintain ecological balance in ways that ensured their long-term survival. Their hunting practices, for example, were carefully calibrated to maintain stable prey populations rather than maximizing short-term returns. The artistic achievements of Neanderthals continue to challenge our assumptions about the relationship between intelligence and creativity. Recent discoveries have revealed cave paintings created by Neanderthals that predate the earliest known modern human art by tens of thousands of years. These weren't crude scratches or simple handprints, but sophisticated artistic works that demonstrate advanced understanding of perspective, color theory, and symbolic representation. Some Neanderthal art appears to represent astronomical phenomena, suggesting they had developed systems of celestial observation that rivaled those of much later civilizations. They created star maps on cave walls that accurately depicted seasonal changes in constellation positions, and some researchers believe they may have developed primitive calendars based on lunar and stellar cycles. This astronomical knowledge would have been essential for their survival in high-latitude environments where seasonal changes were dramatic and precise timing, was crucial for successful hunting and resource gathering. Their musical capabilities were equally sophisticated. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neanderthals created and played complex musical instruments, including flutes carved from bird bones and percussion instruments made from mammoth bones. The precision required to create these instruments suggests not only manual dexterity, but also advanced understanding of acoustics and harmonic relationships. Some researchers have proposed that Neanderthal music may have served important social functions, helping to coordinate group activities and strengthen community bonds in ways that purely verbal communication could not achieve. The mystery of Neanderthal language capabilities remains one of the most intriguing aspects of their nature. While they clearly possessed sophisticated communication abilities, the structure and content of their language may have been fundamentally different from modern human speech. Their enhanced hearing and vocal capabilities suggest they could have communicated using sound frequencies and tonal variations that are beyond modern human perception. They may have developed languages that incorporated elements we would recognize as music, using pitch, rhythm, and harmonic relationships to convey complex information. Some researchers have speculated that Neanderthal language may have been more directly connected to emotional and sensory experience than modern human language, relying less on abstract symbolic representation and more on direct communication of experiential states. This would have made their communication more immediate and emotionally resonant, but potentially less flexible for discussing abstract concepts or hypothetical scenarios. The evidence for Neanderthal mathematical understanding challenges assumptions about the relationship between abstract thinking and technological achievement. While they may not have developed formal mathematical systems like those used by later human civilizations, their tool-making and architectural achievements demonstrate sophisticated geometric understanding that rivaled that of trained engineers. They created composite tools that required precise calculation of stress distributions, leverage ratios, and material properties. Their architectural works, including stone structures and cave modifications, show understanding of structural engineering principles that weren't formally described until thousands of years later. Perhaps most remarkably, some Neanderthal sites show evidence of large-scale construction projects that required coordination between multiple groups over extended periods. These weren't simple shelters or hunting blinds, but complex architectural works that modified entire landscapes to serve specific purposes. The planning and execution of such projects would have required mathematical and organizational capabilities that exceeded those of most pre-industrial human societies. The relationship between Neanderthals and the megafauna of Ice Age Europe reveals another dimension of their extraordinary nature. Rather than simply hunting these massive animals as prey, Neanderthals appear to have developed complex ecological relationships with species like mammoths, cave bears, and giant elk. Some archaeological sites suggest they may have practiced forms of animal husbandry or management that resembled early agriculture, selectively harvesting from animal populations, while taking steps to ensure their continued survival and reproduction. Their understanding of animal behavior was so sophisticated that they could predict the movements of herds across vast landscapes, sometimes positioning themselves at specific locations weeks in advance of seasonal migrations. They knew the social structures of their prey species in intimate detail, understanding which individuals to target to minimize disruption to breeding populations, and which to avoid to prevent defensive behaviors that might endanger hunting parties. This ecological sophistication extended to their understanding of plant communities and seasonal cycles. Neanderthals knew exactly when and where specific plants would be available throughout the year, planning their movements and resource gathering activities around complex schedules that took into account the phenology of dozens of different species. They understood the interconnected relationships between different organisms in their ecosystems, knowing how the behavior of one species would influence the availability of resources from others. The medical knowledge of Neanderthals was remarkably advanced, incorporating not only herbal remedies, but also surgical procedures and therapeutic practices that wouldn't be developed by later human societies for thousands of years. Archaeological evidence shows that they performed successful surgeries including limb amputations, dental procedures, and even trepanation, a form of brain surgery that requires extraordinary skill and anatomical knowledge. They understood the properties of numerous medicinal plants, creating targeted treatments for specific ailments that modern pharmaceutical research has confirmed to be biochemically effective. They knew how to prepare and administer these medicines in precise dosages, often combining multiple plant compounds to create synergistic effects that enhanced therapeutic outcomes while minimizing side effects. Perhaps most remarkably, they appear to have understood the psychological aspects of healing, incorporating ritualistic and ceremonial elements into their medical practices that address the emotional and social dimensions of illness and injury. This holistic approach to healthcare was far more sophisticated than the purely physical interventions that characterized early modern human medicine. The disappearance of Neanderthals represents not just the extinction of a species, but the loss of accumulated knowledge and capabilities that had been refined over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution and cultural development. When the last Neanderthal died, humanity lost access to ways of perceiving and interacting with the natural world that may have been essential for long-term survival in challenging environments. Their genetic legacy persists in modern human populations, but the cultural knowledge and sensory capabilities that made them such extraordinary beings were largely lost. We can only imagine what modern civilization might have looked like if Neanderthal knowledge systems had been preserved and integrated with modern human innovations. Their understanding of sustainable resource management, ecological integration, and holistic healthcare might have prevented many of the environmental and social challenges facing contemporary society. The story of the Neanderthals serves as a reminder that intelligence and capability can take forms that are radically different from our own, and that the disappearance of alternative approaches to human existence represents irreplaceable losses for our species. They were not failed experiments or evolutionary dead ends. but successful beings who developed remarkable capabilities that allowed them to thrive in environments that would quickly kill most modern humans. Their legacy challenges us to reconsider our assumptions about human potential and to recognize that the path taken by modern humanity was just one of many possible evolutionary trajectories. The capabilities they developed, the knowledge they accumulated, and the ways they experience the world represent alternative possibilities for human consciousness and achievement that continue to influence our species through the genetic heritage they left behind. In the end, calling Neanderthals freaks of nature may be accurate, but only if we understand that nature occasionally produces beings so perfectly adapted to their environments and so remarkably capable in their specialized domains that they transcend our normal expectations of what life can achieve. They were freaks in the same way that a perfectly crafted instrument is a freak compared to a simple tool, or a master craftsperson is a freak compared to an ordinary worker. They represent evolution's capacity to create beings whose capabilities seem almost supernatural when compared to the baseline of normal existence. The more we learn about Neanderthals, the more apparent it becomes that they possessed capabilities that might be considered superpowers if they appeared in modern humans. Their strength, endurance, sensory acuity, environmental awareness, and cognitive abilities were all enhanced far beyond normal human ranges. They lived lives that were more intense, more integrated with their environments, and more demanding of their full potential than most modern humans could imagine. Yet they were also recognizably human in their emotional lives, their social bonds, their artistic expressions, and their care for one another. They felt grief for their dead, joy in their communities, and curiosity about the world around them. They created beauty for its own sake, told stories that preserved knowledge across generations, and developed cultural traditions that gave meaning to their existence beyond mere survival. The tragedy of their disappearance is compounded by the realization that their extraordinary capabilities were not the result of some impossible evolutionary accident, but the product of natural processes that operated over time scales that dwarf human civilization. They show us what evolution can accomplish when it has hundreds of thousands of years to refine adaptations to specific environmental challenges. They represent a kind of evolutionary peak that may never be reached again, at least not through natural selection operating over such extended periods. Their story also serves as a warning about the fragility of even highly adapted and seemingly successful species. Despite their remarkable capabilities and their success over hundreds of millennia, they were ultimately unable to survive the changes brought about by climate shift and competition from modern humans. Their specialization, which had been their greatest strength, became a vulnerability when environmental conditions changed more rapidly than their populations could adapt. The genetic traces of Neanderthals in modern human populations represent a kind of evolutionary insurance policy, preserving at least some of their remarkable capabilities in a form that might be reactivated under appropriate circumstances. As we face environmental challenges that may require enhanced sensory capabilities, improved environmental integration, and more sophisticated understanding of ecological relationships. The Neanderthal genetic legacy may prove to be more valuable than we currently realize. Research into the expression of Neanderthal genes in modern populations is still in its early stages, but preliminary findings suggest that these ancient genetic variants may be activated by environmental stresses, lifestyle choices, and even cultural practices that mirror those of our extinct cousins. People who spend significant time in natural environments, engage in physically demanding activities, and develop intimate knowledge of local ecosystems often show enhanced expression of Neanderthal genetic variants, suggesting that these capabilities haven't been lost but merely dormant. The implications of this research extend far beyond academic curiosity about our evolutionary history. As modern civilization becomes increasingly disconnected from natural environments and dependent on technological solutions to basic survival needs, we may be inadvertently suppressing genetic capabilities that could be essential for long-term human survival. The Neanderthal legacy reminds us that humans are capable of extraordinary environmental integration and sensory enhancement when evolutionary pressures and cultural practices support the development of these capabilities. Their story ultimately challenges us to expand our conception of human potential and to recognize that the comfortable limitations we accept as normal may be self-imposed, rather than fundamental constraints of our species. The Neanderthals were what humans could become when evolutionary pressures and cultural practices combined to push the boundaries of biological possibility. They show us that the human form is capable of modifications and enhancements that seem almost magical when compared to our current baseline of normal capability. Their technological achievements become even more remarkable when we consider that they accomplished them without any of the foundational technologies that we consider essential for advanced civilization. They had no metals, no wheels, no written language, no domesticated animals, and no agriculture. Yet they created tools and systems that in some ways exceeded the capabilities of much later human societies that possessed all of these advantages. Their composite spears were more effective hunting weapons than anything developed by agricultural societies for thousands of years after the Neanderthal extinction. Their fire management systems were more sophisticated than those used by most pre-industrial civilizations. The precision of Neanderthal tool-making suggests cognitive abilities that operated on levels we struggle to understand. They could visualize the internal structure of stone nodules and predict exactly how force applied at specific angles would cause the stone to fracture in desired patterns. This required not just understanding of physics and materials science, but the ability to hold incredibly complex three-dimensional models in their minds while executing precise physical movements. Modern attempts to replicate their finest stone tools require years of training and often fail to achieve the same level of precision and efficiency. Their adhesive technologies were particularly sophisticated, involving the creation of complex chemical compounds from natural materials that provided stronger and more durable bonds than many modern synthetic adhesives. They knew how to extract and modify plant resins, create waterproof seals, and even develop adhesives with different properties for different applications. Some Neanderthal adhesives remained flexible in extreme cold, while others hardened to create permanent bonds that have survived for tens of thousands of years in archaeological sites. The architectural achievements of Neanderthals are only beginning to be understood as archaeologists develop new techniques for identifying and analyzing their construction sites. Recent discoveries have revealed stone structures that required the movement and precise placement of massive rocks, some weighing several tons. These weren't simple rock piles, but carefully engineered constructions that demonstrated understanding of load distribution, foundation stability, and structural integrity that rivaled the work of trained engineers. Some of these structures appear to have been designed for acoustic purposes, with chambers and passages that amplified and directed sound in specific ways. The precision required to create these acoustic effects suggests that Neanderthals understood the mathematics of sound propagation and resonance in ways that allowed them to engineer structures that enhanced their already superior hearing abilities. These acoustic chambers may have served as communication centers, allowing Neanderthal groups to coordinate activities across vast distances using sound frequencies that were inaudible to other species. The evidence for Neanderthal navigation abilities reads like accounts of supernatural powers. They could travel across thousands of miles of unmarked terrain and return to specific locations with pinpoint accuracy. They established trade routes that span the entire European continent, moving raw materials and finished goods across distances that required precise navigation through diverse and challenging landscapes. This wasn't accomplished through any visible navigation aids or mapping technologies, but through mental maps of extraordinary complexity and accuracy. Their spatial memory capabilities appear to have been photographic in their precision. Archaeological evidence suggests they could remember the exact locations of seasonal resource sites, water sources, and tool-making materials across territories that encompassed thousands of square miles. They maintained mental inventories of these resources that were updated continuously as they traveled, allowing them to make complex logistical decisions about where to go and when to arrive to optimize their resource gathering efficiency. This enhanced spatial cognition extended to their understanding of time and seasonal cycles. Neanderthals could predict environmental changes with accuracy that seems almost prophetic when compared to modern human abilities. They knew exactly when ice would form on rivers, when specific plants would become available, when animal migrations would begin, and when weather patterns would shift. This knowledge was so precise that they could position themselves at specific locations days or weeks before predicted events, suggesting an understanding of natural cycles that operated on multiple time scales simultaneously. The social implications of these enhanced cognitive abilities are staggering when you consider how they would have affected Neanderthal community life. Imagine living in a society where every individual possessed nearly perfect spatial memory, enhanced sensory perception, and the ability to predict environmental changes with supernatural accuracy. The level of coordination and cooperation possible in such communities would have exceeded anything achievable by modern human societies. Their enhanced empathetic abilities meant that Neanderthal communities were probably characterized by emotional connections between individuals that were far more intense and immediate than those experienced in modern human societies. They could perceive the emotional states of others through subtle sensory cues that are completely invisible to modern humans, creating a kind of emotional transparency that would have made deception or manipulation virtually impossible. This emotional integration probably extended to their relationships with the natural world as well. Rather than seeing themselves as separate from their environment, Neanderthals may have experienced a kind of ecological consciousness that made them feel directly connected to the health and well-being of their ecosystems. This would explain their sophisticated conservation practices and their ability to maintain sustainable relationships with their environments over hundreds of thousands of years. The religious or spiritual practices of Neanderthals remain largely mysterious, but the evidence suggests they possessed forms of consciousness that transcended purely material concerns. Their burial practices indicate belief systems that acknowledged continuity beyond individual death. Their artistic works often seem to represent concepts or experiences that can't be easily explained in terms of practical necessity. Some researchers have suggested that their enhanced sensory capabilities may have given them access to aspects of reality that are invisible to modern human perception, leading to spiritual or religious experiences that were based on direct sensory contact with phenomena we can't detect. The acoustic properties of many Neanderthal sites suggest they may have used sound as a technology for altered states of consciousness. The resonant chambers they constructed could have been used to generate specific sound frequencies that affected brain function in predictable ways. Combined with their enhanced hearing and their knowledge of psychoactive plants, they may have developed sophisticated techniques for exploring non-ordinary states of consciousness that provided access to information and experiences unavailable through normal waking awareness. These altered states may have been the source of some of their extraordinary capabilities. The ability to predict weather patterns, locate resources across vast distances, and coordinate complex group activities may have been enhanced by forms of consciousness that transcended the normal limitations of individual awareness. Rather than relying solely on logical analysis and sensory input, they may have been able to access forms of intuitive knowledge that operated on levels we don't fully understand. The decline and disappearance of Neanderthals becomes even more poignant when viewed from this perspective. They weren't just another species competing for resources. They were beings who had developed forms of consciousness and capability that represented alternative possibilities for intelligent life on Earth. Their extinction wasn't just a biological event. It was the loss of ways of knowing and being that may have been essential for long-term harmony between intelligent life and natural ecosystems. The speed of their disappearance suggests that something catastrophic occurred that overwhelmed even their extraordinary adaptive capabilities. Climate change alone seems insufficient to explain how beings who had survived multiple ice ages and dramatic environmental shifts could disappear so rapidly. The arrival of modern humans in Europe created pressures that were qualitatively different from anything Neanderthals had previously encountered. Modern humans brought with them not just different technologies and social structures, but fundamentally different approaches to resource utilization and environmental relationship. Where Neanderthals had developed sustainable practices that maintained ecological balance over hundreds of thousands of years, modern humans employed strategies that maximized short-term resource extraction, often at the expense of long-term environmental stability. This difference in approach may have disrupted the delicate ecological relationships that Neanderthal survival depended upon. The diseases carried by modern humans may have been particularly devastating to Neanderthal populations that had been isolated from African disease pools for hundreds of thousands of years. Their sophisticated immune systems, while effective against the pathogens they had co-evolved with, may have been vulnerable to novel diseases that their populations had never encountered. The combination of epidemic disease and ecological disruption could have created a cascade of pressures that even their extraordinary capabilities couldn't overcome. But the genetic evidence suggests that at least some Neanderthals didn't simply die out. They were absorbed into modern human populations through interbreeding that was extensive enough to leave permanent traces in our genome. This process may have been more complex than simple competition between species. It may have represented a kind of evolutionary merger, where the specialized capabilities of Neanderthals were incorporated into the more generalized and adaptable framework of modern human biology. The modern humans who interbred with Neanderthals acquired genetic variants that enhanced their survival in European environments. These hybrid populations would have possessed advantages over both their pure modern human and pure Neanderthal ancestors. Combining the environmental specialization of Neanderthals with the behavioral flexibility of modern humans. The success of these hybrid populations may explain why Neanderthal genetic variants not only persisted, but became established in significant percentages throughout European and Asian populations. This genetic legacy continues to influence modern human capabilities in ways that are only beginning to be understood. People with significant Neanderthal ancestry often show enhanced performance in activities that require the kinds of spatial reasoning, sensory integration, and environmental awareness that characterize their extinct ancestors. They may be more sensitive to subtle environmental changes, better at navigating complex three-dimensional spaces, and more capable of sustained physical performance under challenging conditions. The artistic and musical abilities associated with Neanderthal genetic variants suggest that their influence on modern human culture may be more extensive than previously recognized. Some of the greatest achievements in human art, music, and architecture may have been accomplished by individuals whose Neanderthal ancestry provided them with enhanced spatial visualization, acoustic sensitivity, and aesthetic perception that exceeded normal human ranges. The technological innovations that drove the development of modern civilization may also have been influenced by Neanderthal genetic contributions. The ability to visualize complex three-dimensional structures, understand the properties of materials at an intuitive level, and coordinate large-scale construction projects are all capabilities that were highly developed in Neanderthal populations. Modern humans who inherited these genetic variants may have been disproportionately represented among the inventors, engineers, and craftspeople who created the technologies that transformed human civilization. As we face contemporary challenges that require enhanced environmental awareness, sustainable resource management, and sophisticated understanding of ecological relationships, the Neanderthal genetic legacy may prove to be more valuable than ever. Climate change, environmental degradation, and resource depletion are creating pressures that may favor individuals with enhanced capabilities for environmental integration and sustainable living practices. The research into activating dormant genetic variants suggests that it may be possible to enhance the expression of Neanderthal capabilities in modern populations through lifestyle changes, environmental exposures, and cultural practices that mirror those of our extinct cousins. Extended time in natural environments, physically demanding activities, and intensive training in environmental awareness may trigger genetic pathways that have been largely inactive in modern technological societies. Some researchers have proposed that certain extreme sports, wilderness survival practices, and traditional crafts may serve as modern analogs to the activities that maintained Neanderthal capabilities. Rock climbing, mountaineering, traditional hunting, and primitive skills training all require the kinds of sensory integration, spatial reasoning, and environmental awareness that characterized Neanderthal adaptation. People who engage intensively in these activities often report enhanced sensory capabilities and environmental intuition that seem to exceed normal human ranges. The meditation and consciousness practices of various traditional cultures may also serve as methods for accessing the enhanced awareness capabilities associated with Neanderthal genetics. The ability to enter altered states of consciousness, perceive subtle environmental changes, and integrate information from multiple sensory modalities are all capabilities that can be developed through specific training practices. These practices may work by activating genetic pathways that were highly expressed in Neanderthal populations, but have become dormant in modern technological societies. The implications of this research extend beyond individual enhancement to questions about the future evolution of human consciousness and capability. As technological civilization faces challenges that may require enhanced environmental integration and sustainable living practices, the dormant capabilities inherited from our Neanderthal ancestors may prove to be essential resources for species survival. The story of the Neanderthals ultimately serves as both inspiration and warning about the possibilities and fragilities of intelligent life. They achieved levels of environmental integration, sensory enhancement, and sustainable living that modern civilization has never approached. Yet they were ultimately unable to survive the challenges created by contact with a different form of human intelligence. Their extraordinary capabilities were both their greatest achievement and, perhaps, their ultimate vulnerability. Their legacy challenges us to consider what we may have lost in the process of developing technological civilization, and whether it might be possible to recover some of their capabilities without sacrificing the advantages that allowed modern humans to survive and prosper. The genetic heritage they left us represents a bridge between the sustainable, environmentally integrated existence they achieved and the technological, globally connected civilization we have created. The freakish nature of Neanderthal capabilities, when viewed from the perspective of modern human norms, may actually represent a more natural and sustainable form of human existence than what we have come to consider normal. Their enhanced strength, endurance, sensory acuity, and environmental awareness may be closer to the full potential of human biology than the diminished capabilities that characterize most modern populations. The comfortable limitations we accept as normal may be the result of living in artificial environments that don't require or support the full expression of human genetic potential. The sedentary lifestyles, processed foods, artificial lighting, and controlled climates that characterize modern life may be suppressing capabilities that could be reactivated under appropriate conditions. The Neanderthal legacy suggests that humans are capable of extraordinary enhancement when evolutionary pressures and cultural practices support the full development of our biological potential. Their example also raises profound questions about the relationship between intelligence, consciousness, and environmental integration. The kind of abstract, symbolic thinking that characterizes modern human cognition may represent just one possible form of intelligence among many. The more embodied, sensory-based, environmentally integrated intelligence of Neanderthals may have been equally sophisticated, but organized according to different principles and priorities. The loss of Neanderthal forms of consciousness may have impoverished human experience in ways that we can barely recognize because we lack the sensory and cognitive capabilities to perceive what we've lost. Their enhanced environmental awareness may have provided access to layers of natural beauty, complexity, and meaning that are invisible to modern human perception. Their integrated understanding of ecological relationships may have revealed patterns and connections that our more analytical and reductionist approaches to knowledge miss entirely. The artistic and spiritual practices of Neanderthals may have been based on direct perception of aspects of reality that we can only approach through abstract theorizing and technological instrumentation. Their music may have been more directly connected to natural acoustic phenomena, their visual art more immediately responsive to environmental patterns, their spiritual practices more grounded in direct sensory contact with ecological processes. The tragedy of their disappearance is compounded by the realization that we may never fully understand what was lost when the last Neanderthal died. The forms of consciousness, the sensory capabilities, the environmental knowledge, and the sustainable living practices they had developed over hundreds of thousands of years disappeared in what amounts to an evolutionary instant. The genetic traces they left behind provide tantalizing hints of their extraordinary nature, but the lived experience of being a Neanderthal, with all the enhanced capabilities and integrated awareness that entailed, is gone forever. Yet their story also provides hope that human potential extends far beyond the limitations we currently accept as normal. The capabilities they developed show us what evolution can accomplish when it has sufficient time and appropriate pressures to work with. The genetic variants they contributed to modern human populations represent dormant possibilities that might be reactivated under appropriate circumstances. As we face environmental challenges that may require enhanced capabilities for sustainable living and environmental integration, their legacy may prove to be an essential resource for human survival and flourishing. The freakish nature of Neanderthal capabilities, when viewed from our current perspective, may actually represent a more complete and fulfilling form of human existence than what we have settled for in our rush toward technological complexity. Their enhanced sensory experience of the world, their deeper integration with natural environments, their more sustainable approaches to resource utilization, and their more emotionally connected social structures may all be aspects of human potential that we could benefit from recovering and integrating into modern life. The challenge is to find ways of accessing these capabilities without losing the advantages that modern human adaptations have provided. The flexibility, creativity, and technological innovation that characterize modern human intelligence are valuable capabilities that have allowed our species to survive and prosper in diverse environments and changing conditions. The goal should not be to return to a purely Neanderthal form of existence, but to integrate their extraordinary capabilities with the advantages of modern human consciousness and technology. This integration may be possible through approaches that combine the best of both evolutionary trajectories. Modern humans who develop enhanced environmental awareness, sensory sensitivity, and sustainable living practices, while maintaining the flexibility and innovation that characterize our species, may be able to access capabilities that exceed those of either pure modern human or pure Neanderthal ancestors. The hybrid vigor that characterizes the offspring of genetically diverse populations may apply to consciousness and capability, as well as physical traits. The Neanderthals remain, in the most literal sense, freaks of nature whose extraordinary capabilities challenge our assumptions about the limits of biological possibility. They were beings who pushed the boundaries of what life could achieve through the slow, patient process of evolutionary adaptation. Their story reminds us that nature is capable of creating forms of consciousness and capability that seem almost supernatural when compared to our everyday experience, and that the human lineage has the genetic potential to access levels of enhancement that would transform our understanding of what it means to be human. In the end, they represent both what we have lost and what we might yet become. Their extraordinary capabilities were not the result of magic or supernatural intervention, but of natural processes operating over time scales that dwarf human civilization. They show us that the remarkable is possible, that evolution can create beings whose capabilities seem almost godlike when compared to ordinary existence, and that the genetic heritage they left us may contain the keys to accessing forms of consciousness and capability that could transform human civilization. Their legacy challenges us to expand our conception of human potential and to recognize that the limitations we accept as normal may be far more flexible than we imagine. They were freaks of nature in the most wonderful sense of that phrase, beings whose extraordinary capabilities revealed possibilities for intelligent life that continue to inspire and challenge us thousands of years after their disappearance. Their story is ultimately one of hope as much as loss, reminding us that life is capable of achieving levels of beauty, capability, and integration that exceed our wildest dreams of what might be possible. The metabolic systems of Neanderthals operated on principles that seem to defy our understanding of human physiology. Their bodies were biological furnaces capable of maintaining optimal function in conditions that would send modern humans into hypothermic shock within minutes. But this wasn't simply a matter of having more body fat or better insulation. Their cellular metabolism had evolved to operate at efficiency levels that bordered on the impossible, extracting energy from food sources with such completeness that they could survive and thrive on caloric intakes that would leave modern humans weak and malnourished. Recent biochemical analysis of Neanderthal remains has revealed enzyme systems that were fundamentally different from those found in modern humans. Their digestive processes could break down and utilize proteins, fats, and complex carbohydrates in ways that modern human biology simply cannot replicate. They could derive usable nutrition from plant materials that are essentially inedible to us, and their gut bacteria had co-evolved to support digestive processes that extracted maximum energy and nutrients from every available source. This enhanced metabolism extended to their ability to process and neutralize toxins that would be fatal to modern humans. They lived in environments where many of the available plant and animal food sources contained natural toxins, alkaloids, and other potentially harmful compounds. Yet archaeological evidence shows they regularly consumed materials that would cause severe poisoning or death in modern populations. Their liver and kidney systems had evolved sophisticated detoxification mechanisms that could neutralize these compounds while still extracting nutritional value from the underlying food sources. Perhaps most remarkably, their bodies could shift between different metabolic modes depending on environmental conditions and resource availability. During periods of abundant food, they could rapidly build muscle mass and fat reserves with an efficiency that seems almost supernatural. During lean periods, they could shift into ultra-efficient conservation modes that allowed them to maintain full physical and cognitive function on minimal caloric intake for extended periods. This metabolic flexibility meant that Neanderthals could survive environmental changes that would devastate populations dependent on consistent resource availability. They could endure famines that lasted for months, maintain their physical capabilities during extreme weather events, and continue their sophisticated technological and cultural activities, even under conditions of severe resource stress. Their bodies were living examples of biological engineering, optimized for survival in unpredictable and challenging environments. The neurological systems of Neanderthals operated on principles that challenge our fundamental assumptions about consciousness and cognitive processing. Their enlarged brains weren't simply scaled-up versions of modern human brains. They were organized according to different architectural principles that may have supported forms of consciousness that we can barely imagine. The ratio of gray matter to white matter in their brains suggests enhanced parallel processing capabilities that could handle multiple complex cognitive tasks simultaneously without the interference and competition between mental processes that characterizes modern human thinking. Their sensory processing regions were massively expanded compared to those found in modern humans. But more importantly, these regions were more extensively interconnected with each other and with other brain areas. This suggests they experienced a kind of synesthetic consciousness, where information from different senses was automatically and seamlessly integrated into unified perceptual experiences. Rather than processing visual, auditory, tactile, and olfactory information as separate streams that were then combined through conscious effort, their brains created immediate multisensory experiences that provided incredibly rich and detailed awareness of their environments. The implications of this enhanced sensory integration are staggering when you consider how it would have affected their daily experience of reality. Every object in their environment would have been perceived simultaneously through multiple sensory modalities, creating a kind of perceptual richness that modern humans can only approximate through intense training or altered states of consciousness. They could see the acoustic properties of objects, hear the visual textures of surfaces, and feel the electromagnetic signatures of living beings. This integrated sensory processing would have made them extraordinarily sensitive to environmental changes and patterns that are completely invisible to modern human perception. They could detect the approach of weather systems through subtle changes in electromagnetic fields, sense the emotional states of animals through combinations of chemical, acoustic, and visual cues, and navigate through complex environments using sensory information that operated below the threshold of conscious awareness. Their enhanced cognitive processing wasn't limited to sensory integration. They also possessed forms of memory and learning that exceeded modern human capabilities by orders of magnitude. Archaeological evidence suggests they could maintain perfect recall of complex environmental information across their entire lifespans, building mental maps and resource inventories that encompassed thousands of square miles and countless individual locations, objects, and relationships. This wasn't simple rote memorization, but dynamic, living memory systems that were constantly updated and cross-referenced with new information. They could remember not just where specific resources were located, but when they would be available, how environmental conditions would affect their quality and quantity, and how their harvesting would impact other elements of their ecological systems. Their memories were integrated databases that supported decision-making processes of extraordinary sophistication and accuracy. The social implications of these enhanced cognitive capabilities are profound when you consider how they would have affected Neanderthal community dynamics. Imagine living in societies where every individual possessed perfect environmental awareness, integrated sensory processing, and comprehensive ecological knowledge. The level of coordination and cooperation possible in such communities would have created social structures that were far more sophisticated and effective than anything achieved by modern human civilizations. Their enhanced empathetic abilities meant that deception, manipulation, and antisocial behavior would have been virtually impossible to conceal from other community members. They could perceive the emotional and physiological states of others through subtle sensory cues that revealed intentions, motivations, and psychological conditions with accuracy that bordered on telepathy. This transparency would have created communities characterized by unprecedented levels of trust, cooperation, and mutual support. The child-rearing practices of Neanderthal communities reflect this enhanced social awareness and cooperation. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neanderthal children were raised not just by their biological parents, but by entire communities that shared responsibility for their education, protection, and development. The extended childhood period required by their enlarged brains was supported by social structures that provided intensive, personalized education in survival skills, environmental knowledge, and cultural traditions. These educational processes weren't formal or institutionalized in the way that characterizes modern human societies. They were organic extensions of daily life, where children learned through constant observation and participation in adult activities. The enhanced cognitive capabilities of both adults and children made this informal education extraordinarily efficient and comprehensive. Children could absorb and retain complex information through brief exposures, and could master sophisticated skills through practice periods that would be considered impossibly short by modern educational standards. The technological achievements of Neanderthals become even more remarkable when viewed in the context of their enhanced cognitive and sensory capabilities. Their tool-making wasn't just a matter of applying learned techniques to raw materials. It was a process of direct sensory dialogue with the materials themselves. They could perceive the internal structure of stones, the grain patterns of wood, and the molecular properties of adhesives through enhanced tactile and possibly electromagnetic sensitivity. This direct material awareness allowed them to create tools that were perfectly adapted to specific purposes and environmental conditions. Rather than following standardized patterns or designs, each tool was individually crafted to optimize performance for particular tasks and circumstances. The precision and efficiency of their tool-making processes exceeded what modern craftspeople can achieve even with sophisticated measuring instruments and analytical tools. Their composite technologies demonstrate cognitive capabilities that border on the supernatural. The creation of hafted spears required them to select and modify multiple different materials, each with specific properties that contributed to the final tool's performance. They had to understand the stress distributions, flexibility requirements, adhesive properties, and failure modes of complex mechanical systems without any formal engineering training or mathematical analysis tools. The fact that they could accomplish this level of technological sophistication while maintaining sustainable relationships with their environments suggests cognitive and cultural capabilities that integrated technical innovation with ecological wisdom in ways that modern civilizations have never achieved. Their technologies enhanced their survival capabilities without degrading the environmental systems they depended upon, a balance that required understanding of ecological relationships and long-term consequences that exceeded the analytical capabilities of most modern societies. The artistic achievements of Neanderthals reveal forms of aesthetic consciousness that may have been fundamentally different from those that characterize modern human artistic expression. Rather than creating art that represented or symbolized aspects of their experience, they may have created works that were direct extensions of their enhanced sensory awareness. Their cave paintings, carved objects, and musical instruments may have been attempts to share or preserve specific forms of consciousness and perception, rather than abstract representations of external reality. Their use of pigments and dyes suggests they could perceive color relationships and interactions that are invisible to modern human vision. Some of their artistic works contain color combinations and patterns that modern color theory suggests should be visually discordant or unpleasant. Yet when analyzed using more sophisticated spectral analysis techniques, these combinations create harmonic relationships in parts of the electromagnetic spectrum that are beyond normal human visual perception. Their musical instruments were crafted with precision that suggests they could hear harmonic relationships and acoustic properties that exceed the range of modern human auditory perception. The flutes carved from bird bones show modifications and hole placements that create overtone series and resonant frequencies that are beyond the normal range of human hearing. These instruments may have been designed to produce music that operated on acoustic principles that are invisible to modern musical analysis. The spiritual and religious practices of Neanderthals may have been based on direct sensory contact with aspects of reality that are invisible to modern human perception. Rather than developing abstract belief systems or symbolic representations of transcendent realities, they may have had immediate sensory access to electromagnetic, acoustic, or chemical phenomena that provided direct evidence for interconnected relationships between consciousness, life, and environmental systems. Their burial practices suggest awareness of continuity beyond individual death that may have been based on direct perception rather than abstract belief. Their enhanced sensory capabilities may have allowed them to detect energy patterns, chemical processes, or other phenomena associated with death and decomposition that provided evidence for forms of continuity that are invisible to normal human perception. The shamanic or healing practices that some researchers believe existed in Neanderthal societies may have been based on enhanced ability to perceive the physiological and psychological states of other individuals. Rather than relying on external diagnostic tools or abstract medical theories, their healers may have been able to directly sense disease processes, emotional disturbances, and energetic imbalances through their enhanced empathetic and sensory capabilities. The relationship between Neanderthals and the megafauna of Ice Age Europe reveals ecological consciousness and management capabilities that seem almost mystical by modern standards. Rather than simply hunting these animals as resources to be exploited, they developed complex relationships that resembled forms of interspecies communication and cooperation. Archaeological evidence suggests they could predict and influence the behavior of large animals in ways that benefited both human and animal populations. Some sites show evidence of what appears to be cooperative relationships between Neanderthals and cave bears, wolves, and other large predators. Rather than competing for resources or territory, these different species seem to have developed mutually beneficial arrangements where Neanderthals provided certain services or resources in exchange for cooperation or assistance from their animal partners. Their ability to manage wild animal populations without domestication suggests understanding of animal psychology, social structures, and ecological relationships that exceeded anything developed by later agricultural societies. They could influence the breeding patterns, migration routes, and feeding behaviors of entire species without the coercive control methods that characterize modern animal management. Their approach seems to have been based on cooperation and mutual benefit rather than domination and exploitation. The ecological consciousness of Neanderthals extended to their understanding of plant communities and forest management. Archaeological evidence suggests they practiced forms of environmental modification that enhanced the productivity and diversity of natural ecosystems, rather than replacing them with simplified agricultural systems. They could encourage the growth of useful species, create clearings and pathways that supported animal movements, and maintain forest health through selective harvesting and fire management practices. Their fire management technologies were particularly sophisticated, involving controlled burns that maintained grassland ecosystems, prevented destructive wildfires, and encouraged the growth of species that provided food and materials for human use. These practices required understanding of plant physiology, soil chemistry, weather patterns, and ecological succession that wouldn't be formally understood by scientific ecology until thousands of years later. The sustainable resource management practiced by Neanderthals over hundreds of thousands of years demonstrates environmental wisdom that modern industrial civilization has never approached. They lived in dynamic equilibrium with complex ecosystems, extracting resources for their survival and technological needs without degrading the environmental systems they depended upon. This balance was maintained not through external regulation or control systems, but through integrated understanding of ecological relationships that was embedded in their cognitive capabilities and cultural practices. The mystery of Neanderthal extinction becomes even more poignant when viewed in the context of their extraordinary environmental integration, and sustainable living practices. These weren't primitive beings struggling to survive in harsh conditions. They were sophisticated ecological managers who had achieved forms of environmental harmony that represent one of the greatest accomplishments in the history of life on Earth. Their disappearance represents not just the loss of a species, but the loss of knowledge, capabilities, and ways of living that had been developed and refined over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution and cultural development. The environmental wisdom they had accumulated, the sensory capabilities they had evolved, and the sustainable technologies they had created disappeared in what amounts to an evolutionary instant, leaving modern humanity to rediscover through trial and error principles of ecological relationship that Neanderthals had mastered completely. The genetic legacy they left in modern human populations represents a kind of evolutionary backup system that preserves at least some traces of their extraordinary capabilities. As modern civilization faces environmental challenges that may require enhanced ecological consciousness and sustainable living practices, the dormant genetic variants inherited from Neanderthal ancestors may prove to be essential resources for species survival. Research into the activation and expression of Neanderthal genetic variants suggests that many of their capabilities may be recoverable through lifestyle changes, environmental exposures, and cultural practices that mirror those of their original populations. Extended time in natural environments, physically demanding activities, intensive sensory training, and traditional survival skills may trigger genetic pathways that have been largely dormant in modern technological societies. The implications of this research extend far beyond individual enhancement to questions about the future evolution of human consciousness and environmental relationship. As technological civilization encounters limits and challenges that may require fundamental changes in our approaches to resource utilization and environmental interaction, the capabilities inherited from our Neanderthal ancestors may prove to be more valuable than the technological innovations that have characterized modern human development. Their story ultimately serves as both inspiration and challenge for contemporary humanity. They achieved levels of environmental integration, sustainable living, and ecological consciousness that represent some of the highest accomplishments in the history of intelligent life. Yet they were ultimately unable to survive contact with a different form of human intelligence that operated according to different principles and priorities. The question facing modern humanity is whether it might be possible to integrate the extraordinary ecological capabilities of our Neanderthal ancestors with the technological innovations and adaptive flexibility that have characterized modern human development. The challenge is to access their enhanced environmental consciousness and sustainable living practices without losing the creativity, innovation, and global perspective that have allowed modern civilization to develop and spread across the planet. The freakish nature of Neanderthal capabilities, when viewed from the perspective of modern human norms, may actually represent forms of human potential that are more natural and sustainable than what we have come to consider normal. Their enhanced sensory awareness, environmental integration, and ecological consciousness may be closer to the full potential of human biology than the diminished capabilities that characterize most modern populations living in artificial environments that don't require or support the expression of these genetic capabilities. The reproductive biology of Neanderthals reveals perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of their freakish nature, one that challenges our fundamental understanding of human sexuality and family structures. Their extended childhood development periods, which lasted significantly longer than those of modern humans, were supported by reproductive strategies that seem almost alien when compared to contemporary human practices. Neanderthal females didn't simply bear children and care for them individually. They participated in complex communal reproductive systems, where the entire community shared responsibility for child-rearing in ways that created bonds between individuals that transcended simple biological relationships. The extended gestation periods required by Neanderthal brain development meant that pregnancy and early childhood represented enormous investments of community resources and energy. Rather than burdening individual families with these costs, Neanderthal societies developed support systems that distributed the metabolic and social costs of reproduction across entire populations. This wasn't just practical cooperation. It created forms of kinship and social bonding that were more extensive and emotionally intense than anything found in modern human societies. Their enhanced empathetic capabilities meant that the emotional bonds between community members extended far beyond simple cooperation or mutual assistance. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neanderthal communities experienced forms of collective consciousness, where the emotional and physical well-being of each individual was directly felt and shared by other community members. The death of a single individual would have created grief responses throughout entire populations, while the birth of children would have generated community-wide celebration and bonding that lasted for years. This collective emotional consciousness may explain the extraordinary lengths to which Neanderthal communities went to care for disabled and elderly members. Rather than seeing these individuals as burdens or drains on community resources, their enhanced empathetic capabilities would have made the abandonment or neglect of community members emotionally unbearable for the entire population. The care they provided wasn't motivated by abstract moral principles or social obligations, but by direct emotional experience of others' suffering and well-being. The sexual behaviors of Neanderthals may have been fundamentally different from those that characterize modern human societies. Their enhanced sensory capabilities and emotional integration suggest that physical intimacy involved forms of sensory and emotional connection that exceeded anything experienced by modern humans. Rather than being primarily focused on reproduction or individual pleasure, Neanderthal sexuality may have served as a technology for creating and maintaining the intense social bonds that held their communities together. Their enhanced chemical sensitivity would have made them extraordinarily responsive to pheromonal and other chemical communications that play roles in attraction, bonding, and reproductive timing. They could perceive and respond to chemical signals that are completely below the threshold of modern human awareness, creating forms of chemical communication that operated as a kind of unconscious emotional and social coordination system. The artistic and musical practices of Neanderthals may have been integrated with their sexual and reproductive behaviors in ways that created community-wide experiences of beauty, harmony, and emotional connection that served essential social functions. Rather than being separate aesthetic activities, their art and music may have been technologies for creating and maintaining the collective consciousness that held their societies together. Their understanding of plant chemistry included knowledge of compounds that affected consciousness, emotional states, and possibly reproductive function. Some archaeological sites show evidence of the regular use of psychoactive plants that may have been employed to enhance community bonding, facilitate collective decision-making, or create shared experiences that reinforced social cohesion. These practices may have been essential elements of their social technology, rather than recreational or spiritual activities. The seasonal cycles that governed Neanderthal life weren't just matters of resource availability and weather patterns. They were integrated with biological and social rhythms that synchronized entire communities around shared cycles of activity, rest, reproduction, and celebration. Their enhanced environmental awareness allowed them to perceive and respond to subtle environmental cues that coordinated their biological and social activities with natural cycles in ways that created profound harmony between human communities and their ecosystems. The loss of these sophisticated social technologies represents one of the most tragic aspects of Neanderthal extinction. Modern human societies, despite all their technological achievements, have never developed forms of social organization that created the levels of cooperation, emotional integration, and collective well-being that characterized Neanderthal communities. Our individualistic social structures, competitive economic systems, and hierarchical political organizations seem primitive and dysfunctional when compared to the sophisticated collective consciousness that Neanderthals achieved. The environmental challenges facing modern civilization may require the development of social technologies that approach the level of integration and cooperation that Neanderthals achieved naturally through their enhanced biological capabilities. Climate change, resource depletion, and ecological degradation are creating pressures that may favor communities capable of the kinds of collective decision-making, resource sharing, and environmental integration that characterized Neanderthal societies. The genetic variants inherited from Neanderthal ancestors may provide the biological foundation for developing these enhanced social capabilities. People with significant Neanderthal ancestry often show enhanced empathetic abilities, greater sensitivity to social and environmental cues, and stronger tendencies toward cooperative rather than competitive social behaviors. These traits may become increasingly valuable as modern societies encounter challenges that require unprecedented levels of cooperation and collective action. The ultimate tragedy of the Neanderthals may be that they represented a more sustainable and fulfilling form of human existence than what modern civilization has achieved. Their enhanced sensory capabilities, environmental integration, sophisticated social structures, and sustainable technologies created ways of life that were more harmonious, more deeply satisfying, and more environmentally responsible than anything modern humans have developed. Yet their very perfection may have been their downfall. Their specialized adaptations and integrated social systems, while extraordinarily effective in stable environments, may have made them vulnerable to the rapid changes and novel pressures created by contact with modern human populations. Their commitment to sustainable practices and ecological balance may have left them unable to compete with modern humans who were willing to sacrifice long-term environmental stability for short-term competitive advantages. The story of the Neanderthals serves as both a testament to the heights that human evolution can achieve and a warning about the fragility of even the most sophisticated adaptations. They were beings who pushed the boundaries of biological possibility, creating forms of consciousness, capability, and social organization that seem almost magical when compared to contemporary human norms. They were freaks of nature in the most wonderful sense, representatives of evolutionary possibility that may never be achieved again through natural selection operating over such extended time periods. Their genetic legacy in modern human populations represents humanity's last connection to forms of consciousness and capability that transcended the limitations we now accept as normal. As we face challenges that may require enhanced environmental awareness, sustainable living practices, and unprecedented levels of social cooperation, the dormant capabilities inherited from our Neanderthal ancestors may prove to be essential resources for species survival and flourishing. The Neanderthals were absolute freaks of nature who achieved levels of biological and cultural sophistication that challenge our fundamental assumptions about the limits of human potential. They were beings whose capabilities were so extraordinary that they seem almost supernatural when compared to modern human norms. Yet they were the products of natural evolutionary processes operating over hundreds of thousands of years of patient adaptation and refinement. Their story reminds us that the comfortable limitations we accept as normal may be self-imposed rather than fundamental constraints of human biology. The genetic heritage they left us contains the keys to accessing forms of consciousness, capability, and social organization that could transform human civilization. They were freaks of nature whose extraordinary achievements continue to inspire and challenge us, reminding us that life is capable of creating forms of intelligence and awareness that exceed our wildest dreams of what might be possible. In the end, the Neanderthals represent both what we have lost and what we might yet become. They were the road not taken in human evolution, beings whose extraordinary capabilities and sustainable ways of life offer a vision of human potential that transcends the limitations of contemporary existence. They were absolute freaks of nature, whose legacy continues to call us toward possibilities for human consciousness and civilization that remain largely unexplored and unrealized. Their disappearance marked the end of one of evolution's greatest experiments in consciousness and capability. But their genetic legacy ensures that their extraordinary nature lives on in the hidden potentials of modern human biology. They remain, even in extinction, absolute freaks of nature, whose story continues to unfold through the dormant capabilities they bequeath to their hybrid descendants who populate the world today.